Sometimes a major conflict is more than just the daily headlines and the strategic back and forth. It's one of those moments that, well, it reveals some really deep truths about our world, about our systems, and maybe most importantly, about ourselves. And today, we're going to look directly into that reflection.
And that quote right there, that's really the heart of what we're doing in this explainer. We're going to use this conflict as a mirror. It's a way to see, maybe with a little more clarity, the hidden machinery of power, the shifting nature of morality, and what it all could mean for where we're headed.
So first things first, we have to ask, is the official story, the one we hear day in and day out, is that the whole story? Is this conflict really about what they say it's about?
Okay, so on the surface, the narrative is pretty straightforward, right? It's a regional conflict, it's about security, it's about deterrence. But thinkers like John Mearsheimer and Niall Ferguson are suggesting that there is something much, much bigger going on here. They argue that great powers don't pour this kind of energy and resources into something for just one simple objective. What we might actually be watching is a struggle for the balance of power itself, a full-blown stress test for the entire global system.
And listen, this isn't just some abstract theory. Experts are pointing to really concrete signs that we are stepping into a whole new era. I mean, when countries start making these long-term security deals that completely bypass old alliances, that's a huge sign. When the public and even other nations just stop buying the official reasons for a war, that's another big sign. And this last one is absolutely crucial. Watch the money. Watch the economic architecture. When you see countries building brand new systems for trading oil or sending payments just to get around sanctions, well, that tells you they don't trust the old system to work for them anymore.
So that brings us to the next logical question. If the real game is played on a much deeper level, then who's actually making the big calls? Who's in charge?
It's a question a lot of us feel, even if we can't always put it into words. There's this sense that these massive, world-shaping decisions are being driven by forces that we can't quite see, that aren't fully out in the open.
Now, what's so interesting here is that it shows power isn't one person flipping a switch. It's this complex, tangled web. Sure, elected leaders have the formal authority, but they're constantly getting pushed and pulled by allied governments, by financial pressure from big donors, and honestly, just by the sheer inertia of their own bureaucracies. And then, hovering over all of it, you've got this elite consensus that basically decides which ideas are even allowed to be part of the conversation. It makes figuring out who's truly accountable incredibly difficult.
So, here's the key takeaway. How can you tell what's really driving things? Mearsheimer gives us a pretty powerful tool here. He says, don't just listen to the political talking points of the day. Look for the consistent patterns over a long period of time. If the public reasons for a policy are constantly changing, but the policy itself stays exactly the same, well, then the real motivation is probably something deeper, something that isn't being said out loud. Okay, let's switch gears and talk about technology, because there's a brand new player on the field that is changing the entire equation of war, artificial intelligence. And this is not science fiction. It's happening right now, and it's totally reshaping the moral and ethical landscape.
One of the biggest dangers here isn't that robots are going to take over like in the movies. It's something way more subtle. It's this concept called machine-conditioned judgment. Technically, a human is still in the loop, but think about it. The AI serves up a target with tons of data, a 99% confidence rating, and it does it all in a fraction of a second. The human's role starts to feel less like making a real judgment and more like just clicking approve under enormous pressure.
And this quote just nails the risk perfectly. What Shoshana Zuboff is arguing is that what's being engineered out of the process is the human pause. That little moment of hesitation where we ask, wait, is this right? Does something feel off here? That's the space where conscience lives. And systems that are built for maximum speed and efficiency, they see that pause as a bug to be fixed.
But you have to hear the other side of this. There is a very powerful counter-argument. From this perspective of someone like Thiel, maybe we shouldn't get too romantic about human decision-making in the heat of battle. Humans are emotional, we're biased, we make awful mistakes. So the question becomes, could a well-designed AI actually make war more ethical by being more precise, by taking anger and tribalism out of the equation, and ultimately by reducing the random slaughter of innocent people?
This all leads to a massive crisis of accountability. I mean, just look at this flow. The system makes a recommendation, the human approves it, and if something goes terribly wrong, who's to blame? Is it the operator who trusted the machine? The commander who trusted the operator? The programmer who wrote the code a year ago? Responsibility gets spread so thin that a tragic mistake becomes everyone's choice, and in the end, no one's fault.
And all of this brings us to our final, and maybe the most profound question that the mirror is showing us. If we look beyond the strategy and the technology, what does a conflict like this actually do to the identity, to the moral core of the nations involved?
Cornel West captures this idea so well. A nation's real strength isn't just its GDP or the size of its military. It's also its moral integrity. If a country starts saying one thing and doing another, if it talks about justice while it practices cruelty, it can start to decay from the inside out, even if it looks as powerful as ever on the surface.
And the critical point here, as Douglas Murray explains, isn't that bad things happen in war. Of course they do, they always have. The real danger is when a society loses its ability to see the stain as a stain, when it stops feeling the weight of its own actions, when it can't even recognize that it's crossed a moral line. That's when the real, lasting damage is done.
Which all boils down to this incredibly stark question. If a nation gets what it wants, if it wins the war, but in the process it becomes numb and dishonest and cruel, has it actually saved anything worth having?
In the end, that's what the mirror reflects back at us. The greatest danger in a conflict like this might not be losing on the battlefield, but losing our own soul. It forces us to ask not just what are we doing, but what are we becoming? And that is a question that has no easy answer.